Hello again, guys. We are back with Supernatural Showdown. It is episode 2, and I think it's fair to say we have two fantastic contenders this week. In my corner, I am going with the Beast of Bodmin Moor, or the Beast of Exmoor, or pretty much any big cat that has been sighted in the British Isles. And Salty Texas, who is your contender this week?
I didn't think we'd be able to compare with the Loch Ness Monster and Bigfoot, but this week we've got some spooky stuff. Who's in my corner? That would, of course, be the Wendigo, the classic Native American myth of a cannibalistic killer.
Two fantastic cryptids, I think you will agree.
Yeah. The Wendigo is probably one of the creepiest things I've ever done research on, but this is only our second show, so I'm sure it's only going to get weirder from here.
I certainly like to think so, and we had a fantastic first show. Had an absolute blast getting to talk about these cryptids and really kind of have them go head to head. So a great series, I think.
Yeah, and I like the fact that we're going to use the same criteria we did with the first show for every show we're going to use going forward. Just to remind everybody, we've broken this down into 4 general categories. The first one would be commonality. The second one would be, how lethal is this? Is this a proven danger to human beings? Then believability. Then, of course, we're going to render our final verdict.
Sounds fantastic. So let's get started with the Beast of Bodmin Moor.
Where is this thing found again? Pretend I'm just a dumb American and I don't know the geography of the United Kingdom.
You are anything but a dumb American, but the Beast of Bodmin Moor is found around Cornwall. So Bodmin Moor itself is on the way down to the tip of England, down towards Cornwall, and it's this very desolate moorland, obviously. Very few trees, but vast open plains with little kind of thickets and things.
It's fascinating because as someone who loves Sherlock Holmes and reading Conan Doyle, to hear about yet another creature that is around anywhere where there's a moor, I, of course, always go back to the Hound of the Baskervilles. But that's not this kind of show, I'm just saying.
The Beast of Bodmin Moor has been reported in Exmoor as well, and pretty much all over the British Isles. These big black cats have been reported and seen by multiple eyewitnesses.
Does anybody know when the first sighting of this phenomena occurred? Is this a recent development or does this go back through history?
This goes back quite far. So the first reported sighting that we can verify was in the 1760s, and it was reported a gentleman by the name of William Cobbett said that he saw a cat as big as a middle-sized spaniel dog. It climbed up a tree and disappeared into ruins of an abbey that was nearby. He said it reminded him of a lynx, so that's the type of cat that he said it was. But the most common cat that is reported is a big black cat, so a panther, a puma, a leopard, something like that.
So it's fair to say that a puma or leopard or panther is not native. It's not just something you would drive around a corner and see. This is a true oddity.
Absolutely, yes. And even more so because the British Isles do not have and never have had a native species of large cat. We have a small wild cat, which is in Scotland, but it's not much larger than a domestic cat, and it looks basically like a slightly scruffy tabby cat. So big difference to what we actually have and to what's being reported. But what is thought to have happened is in the 1970s, a act called the Dangerous Wild Animals Act was introduced. Before that, it was perfectly legal for people to own these creatures. You could even buy lions, elephants, giraffes from Harrods in London. But after the 1976, you had to have a license for them. You had to prove that you could house and keep these creatures, and it's believed that a lot were actually released into the wild.
You know, call me old-fashioned, but I don't think anybody needs to own a lion. That's just me, though. Let me ask you this. How many total sightings? I mean, are these still regularly occurring? Did they have a peak time, or is this just a rare phenomenon, or is it quite common?
Doing some research, I thought that this was a lot more scattered than it really was, but between 2004 and 2005, the UK was actually in the top 10 countries for encounters. So regions such as Devon actually had 676 sightings, Yorkshire had 127, Gloucestershire 104, Cornwall itself had 99. So these things are still being seen with very regular commonality.
And you said that these sightings occurred also in Scotland, so all the way in the northern part of the Isles?
Yep, Scotland has 125 reported sightings as of date. And all of these fit the exact same criteria. So it's interesting to note that very few people say they see cats with spots, which would be the most likely thing to see if you think of a leopard or a jaguar, you know, but everybody claims to see a big black cat.
Purple Valkyrie, is there actual evidence? Does anybody have pictures of this? Or is it all just people sort of saying they saw it?
There is a lot of evidence. A lot of it is contested. There is a lot of photographic evidence. There are people who have claimed to have had videos reported. If you do a quick search on YouTube, you can get quite a plethora of supposed evidence that people have posted. Everything from very shaky camcorder footage to footage from drones that people have found as well. So for me, there is a lot of evidence for it, and it just seems too outlandish that there isn't something out there that people are reporting.
The big question everybody wants to know is, have you experienced this phenomena yourself?
I have actually, yes. I was lucky enough. I believe it was about 17 years ago. My family and I were on a road trip down to Cornwall to spend some time for a family getaway, and just driving down one of these country lanes about 200 yards ahead of the car. We were driving quite slowly because they're very windy country lanes and you never know what's coming in the opposite direction. But up ahead of us, just casually crossing the road, was this big black cat. Now, this wasn't a domestic cat. This was something the size of Labrador. It didn't stop. It didn't turn to look at the car. It just kind of slunk across the road, through the hedge and into the field beyond.
Now, that is incredible. Have there been any reports of this creature attacking human beings?
There have been reports, but none of them have been able to be substantiated. There have been reports of kids that on their way to school that have had encounters. There have been a lot of farmers who have lost a lot of livestock over the years. Everything from sheep, poultry, up to horses have been taken. Now people have looked at the corpses and said that, yeah, this is actually a cat attack because cats attack from behind. You can see the puncture marks in the back of the neck, claw marks where they've been held down, and cats attack and eat the stomach area most frequently, and that's what we're missing from these sheep that were found.
Okay, that's creepy and gross. Let's be really honest about it. So this is the question I always like to ask when it comes to the woo-woo. Have there been any related disappearances or clusters of disappearances around where these sightings have occurred?
Not with this particular cryptid, no. They are just scattered throughout the country. They are seen by multiple people from everybody from people who, casually walking their dogs, people, police officers, farmers, teachers, kids, adults, just pretty much a whole range of people throughout the years have reported sightings of these creatures, and they're always very, brief sightings, but everybody describes the same thing.
So here's where we get to the decision. What does the evidence lead you to believe about this beastie, about this phenomena?
I think that there is definitely something out there. Now, skeptics will say that there isn't enough of a breeding population to sustain these creatures, but given the number of sightings that we still have and have had over the centuries, I do think that there is something out there, and I don't think it's beyond the realms of possibility that there was quite a substantial population released from private collections during the 1970s, and probably since then as well. No, a lot of people say that most of these sightings are misidentification. What people are actually seeing are dogs, or they're seeing a domestic cat, but exaggerating the size of them. But even if you took away a big portion of them, there is still a sizable collection of sightings that just cannot be explained, other than what people are seeing is real.
Yeah, I was vaguely aware of this phenomena, and after some of the evidence and the photos and some of the other research that I did looking into this, I'm somewhere between yes and maybe. There's something there, and especially when you look at some of the physical characteristics of this creature, a dog's tail does not look like that. It just doesn't. Cats' tails do. And when you look at the scope and scale of that cat, that is not a small cat. So there is something there. Whether or not it's supernatural, that is a really interesting question, but there's something there.
Absolutely, and they are also known, obviously, not just as British big cats, but ABCs, alien big cats, or phantom cats, for a reason, because they are said to appear and disappear so quickly.
Interdimensional Bigfoot, interdimensional cats.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I could be persuaded. That's all I'll say on this one. What a great creature you found. And this is such a part of the history there, and not only that, but culture. Thank you so much for all that information and detail on this. I think we need to do another follow-up show to talk about the mystical, spiritual, and or interdimensional qualities of this creature.
Yes, I think that would be very interesting, just to list all of these potential things that these creatures are said to be able to do. Absolutely. So, Salty, you said that today your cryptid is going to be the Wendigo. Could you tell us a little bit about this creature?
This is one of those creatures that really is spooky. There's really no other way to put it. Unlike Bigfoot, this is a creature which is primarily based upon a physical manifestation of what can only be called malevolence. Now, many people consider this to be the creation of a horror writer by the name of Algernon Blackwood, who wrote a classic terror tale called The Wendigo. This is actually a malevolent spirit that inhabits the woods of the upper Midwest, as well as all along the Algonquin corridor into Canada, and then, of course, across the plains as well. There are many legends that have circulated not just within our current timeline, within our culture, but also going back to the indigenous populations of the Americas for a good long while. So the American indigenous tribes had their tales of the Wendigo going back so many years that it was actually from the moment when settlers arrived and started crossing the West that is when these stories and warnings of the Wendigo first started. So the Inuit nation also called this creature by a variety of other names, including the Wendigo, the Witigo, the Witiko, the Wetigo, but each of them was roughly translated to mean, literally, quote, the evil spirit that devours mankind, unquote.
Wow.
Around 1860, a German explorer translated Wendigo to mean, quote, cannibal, among the tribes along the Great Lakes region of the United States. Now, there are many versions of this and different type of qualities that the Native American, different cultures and tribes have passed on through their oral tradition, but it all comes down to a creature that is a gigantic phenomena, over 15 feet tall, that had once been a human being, but had somehow been transformed into a creature by the use of black magic. There are various descriptions of this. Some have it very thin, some have it to be skeletal. The Wendigo is generally said to have glowing eyes, long yellow fangs, and an overly long tongue. Actually, let me correct that. Several overly long tongues. They have a sallow, death-like appearance with yellowish skin, yet other tribes have reported them as being matted with fur, kind of like another cryptid we might have talked about by the name of Bigfoot. Now, some describe them as being very tall, lanky, but they are all driven by a terrible, malevolent hunger, meaning they want to eat people. The question is is how would a member of a tribe actually be turned into one of these terrifying creatures? Well, according to the lore, a Wendigo is created whenever a human resorts to cannibalism to survive. Obviously, in the past, such a practice was possible, although still rare, as many of the tribes and even some of the new settlers in the Americas in regions were cut off by bitter snows and winters in the North Woods. Unfortunately, sometimes eating each other, another person, was the only way to survive. And thus, that is how they say a Wendigo was created.
That's incredibly creepy. Wow. Given that this creature is known throughout the Americas, do we have a total number of sightings reported? Is this something that has been recorded, or is it more of a oral tradition?
Most of the stories of Wendigo encounters occurred back in the 19th and very early 20th centuries, but there have been sporadic reports of what could have been possible Wendigos in more modern times. So one in particular is of a young Native American boy, and that this happened at an unspecified reservation in the Great Lakes region, and he was on a camping trip when he was 13 years old. So things went off without a hitch. He was out there camping with a bunch of the other people from the tribe, but they would find dead birds suddenly, and things were missing from their camp even though they had just put them where they belonged. It all escalated when they heard footsteps in the area in the middle of the night, and also encountered what was described as an excruciatingly terrible stench, which would waft all around their tents, and there was also a constant, inescapable feeling of dread as well as being watched. On the second to the last day of their camping trip, something very bizarre actually occurred, and I quote the account. This is of the Native American boy. He said, "I had been strolling through the forest while looking for firewood when I heard rustling in the bushes behind me. And as it happened, it was at that moment that all life and sound seemed to cease around me, because I could only hear my heartbeat and lone, heavy, crashing footsteps in the woods approaching me. I then heard my name called from what seemed every direction and yet nowhere at all, and it seemed to echo over and through me. This sent a tremendous fear up and down my spine, and I ran the fastest I ever have back to the campsite, and then all the while I heard trees and branches crunching behind me. Finally, I reached the campsite when the footsteps stopped suddenly. I was relieved." And he says, quote, "I have never been to that same campsite ever again." This guy didn't go camping for several years. And he says, quote, "Still, what really scares me the most from back then was when we had been leaving the site, he looked back from the car window and saw a lone figure at the tree line staring at him. And it was lanky and looked starved to the point of having its skin wrapped tightly against the bones of its face."
Wow, that is terrifying. I can't imagine coming face to face with a creature like that.
So from a description of this, the beast is known to stalk its prey for hours. The Wendigo may reveal itself to a victim with a loud shriek or scream in order to feed off their terror. And it is said that the creature enjoys creating this terror in their victims, and it adds to the anticipation of their kill. The terror of their victims is perhaps the only form of joy this malevolent spirit of the Northwoods gets.
Wow. Now, with all of these reports and eyewitness accounts, we can say that this creature is extremely lethal. And we obviously, given the story that you just recounted, is incredibly malevolent. But can we tie in any disappearances, as we like to do with these creatures? Are there any reports of them having any connection to bodies of water, for example?
Well, because they're around the Great Lakes, that is the largest concentration of fresh water on the planet. So is there a correlation? I don't know, but it's certainly worth putting on the list. As far as disappearances around the Great Lakes region, both on the Canadian side as well as the American side, there have been a great deal of interesting disappearances. Some of them being planes, some of them being ships that have never been found, people going missing. Is that a direct correlation to the Wendigo? I can't say yes, but it certainly is interesting because you need to add it into the same body of geographic-based phenomena which is occurring.
Yes, I would say it's safe to kind of connect the dots, if you would. We've talked about other people's experiences, but have you yourself ever had any encounters or met anybody who has had any encounters with this creature?
I am very glad to report I have never met a Wendigo. I do have dream catchers, which is part of what they say going along with Native American culture, that some of these creatures, especially the malevolent ones, will find a way in through your dreaming, which is, if we think about it, an altered state of consciousness, which again, an altered state of consciousness might also explain interesting phenomena that is interdimensional as well as spiritual. I don't know anyone who has encountered a Wendigo. I had a couple different Native American friends, because I did grow up in the northern Great Lakes region, and I would hear about some of these stories, but they never reported any contact at all.
We've talked about the experiences people have, but has anybody brought forth any real evidence of them? Has there ever been any photographic evidence, for example, or footprints found?
No, and part of it, one could say, is attributed to the fact that this could potentially be an extra-dimensional creature. It could also be some type of spiritual, for the lack of a better word, manifestation. But the Native Americans believed, and still actively believed, in this phenomena. In fact, they had Wendigo hunters. Now, one of the most famous ones was a Cree Native American named Jack Fiddler. Now, Jack Fiddler claimed that he had killed at least 14 Wendigos in his lifetime. However, the last one that he killed resulted in being charged with murder and his imprisonment at the age of 87. This occurred in October 1907 when Fiddler and his son Joseph were tried for the murder of a Cree woman. They both pleaded guilty to the crime, but strenuously defended themselves by stating that the woman had in fact been possessed by the spirit of a Wendigo and was on the verge of transforming into one fully. According to their own legal defense, she had to be killed before she murdered other members of the Cree tribe. Now, there are still stories coming out that Wendigos have been seen in northern Ontario near the Cave of the Wendigo, which is an actual place around the town of Kenora, where the creature has been spotted by traders, trackers, and trappers going back many, many decades. There are also many who still believe that the Wendigo roams the woods and prairies of northern Minnesota, Wisconsin, the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. What's really not known is whether or not it's actually seeking human flesh, or if it acts as some type of interdimensional portent of coming doom. That's all debatable. What is not debatable is that this fearsome creature has been around for several hundred years before the white man ever set foot on the shores of the Americas.
Yes, absolutely. And just given the range of this creature, it is terrifying. It does seem to be these very lonely places that not many people go, but you definitely wouldn't want to go there now for certain.
Yeah, those woods are different. You know, there's a lot of deep woods in those places, northern Minnesota, northern Wisconsin, obviously most of Canada, northern Michigan. Who knows what's out there?
So I think the final question we need to ask is, do you think that this creature exists? It seems to be something that has been passed down through so many centuries that there seems to be something there. As you say, a lot of First Nation tribes talk about, they have different names for it, but they all describe, once again, the same malevolent entity.
Given the fact that the same type of creature is called different names by the tribes that aren't just in the Great Lakes or, say, New England or Canada, it also extends out to the plains into Montana, Wyoming. They have the same type of phenomena out in the Pacific Northwest as well. I would say this is a maybe. And again, I'm going to give a lot more credence to oral tradition, which is passed down within tribal culture, than what I see on MSNBC. I'm just going to be really honest about that. I think there's a lot more things in our reality, and if we are open to them, if we have an attunement, I would say that if good exists, then evil has to exist. This would be the one thing that I would never want to encounter in the woods ever.
I would absolutely agree. I think there's definitely something more to this than simply just a cautionary tale of, what not to do, how not to behave, especially in the long, lonely winter months when food gets scarce. I think there is definitely something there that we don't know about, but probably the First Nation tribes certainly do, and they've passed this tradition and this story on throughout the generations because of it.
This is one of those rare phenomena that really meets all of the criteria of being truly evil. This exists only to torment us for its pleasure and ultimately to devour us.
Wow, two incredible cryptids. I didn't think that we'd be able to beat the first episode, but I think we might have actually done it this time.
It's different, man, and there are so many other ones out there, Purple Valkyrie, that I cannot wait to get into.
Yeah, we have so much more to cover, guys. And if you have any suggestions for us, please leave them in the comments below. We'd love to hear your take, not just on what we've covered today, but what you would like us to cover in the future. Let me say a huge thank you to Salty Texas for joining once again for Supernatural Showdown. I love getting to do this show, and I cannot wait to do the next episode.
I'm going to have nightmares about this Wendigo thing, but you're welcome, Purple Valkyrie.
Me too. I'm going to go out and buy a dream catcher, I think.
I'll send you a good one.
Guys, have a fantastic rest of your day. Be good to each other, and we will see you again very soon.